They found him in the middle of the road just after 3 a.m. No shoes, no coat, barefoot on black ice. The temperature that night was well below freezing, but his skin wasn't shivering. His pupils were blown wide, his lips were moving, and he kept repeating the same 4 words over and over like a broken tape. I was never here. I was never here. I was never here. I was never here. The deputy who almost hit him with his cruiser thought, at first, he'd clipped a deer. The figure in his headlights didn't look like a person. More like a dark shape slumped in the lane, arms twisted at a wrong angle. He slammed the brakes, stepped out, and realized the shape was standing. Just wrong. Bare feet planted on the yellow line, toes already going pale from the cold, head angled slightly to the side, like he was listening to something only he could hear. Hands hanging, fingers twitching, like they were responding to a rhythm that didn't exist. The man's name was Oliver Grady, 42 years old, teacher, husband, father of 1, missing for 9 days. And sometime between 2:15 and 3:03 a.m., depending on which official record you believe, he walked out of nowhere into the middle of County Road 17 with no memory of where he'd been, how he'd gotten there, or why his medical records would later say he had never left the hospital bed he was tied to. That's where this begins. A man standing barefoot on the center line, staring into the dark, convinced he was never there. And a set of institutions so eager to agree with him that they built an entire case file around proving he had never left their care. If you're here with me tonight, listening to this wherever you are, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Cases like this do not trend. They do not go viral. They get buried under more convenient stories unless people like you decide they're worth remembering. As you listen, tell me in the comments, do you believe a person can lose 9 days of their life and still somehow remember the part everyone else insists never happened? Because the truth of the Grady case doesn't start the night he was found. It starts with a nervous laugh, a missed appointment, a broken pattern, and a mind that began to collapse in slow motion while everyone around him decided it would be easier if they didn't notice. According to the official version, Oliver Grady suffered an acute psychotic episode on a Monday afternoon in January. He was brought to St. Boniface Medical Center by his wife after she found him sitting on the kitchen floor, back against the fridge, dinner burning on the stove, eyes fixed on nothing. He'd been talking to someone who wasn't there. That detail repeats in every interview. The stove was still on. The pan was smoking. And Oliver was looking slightly to the left of the doorway, nodding, as if listening to a conversation Margaret Grady couldn't hear. "Who are you talking to?" she'd asked. It took him a few seconds to notice her. When he did, he tilted his head, almost apologetic. "They're from the school board," he said. "They're here about the girl." There was no one in the doorway. There was no school board appointment scheduled. There was no girl. Not yet. Margaret turned off the stove, helped him up, and watched his legs buckle like he'd been standing there for hours. His hands were cold. His forehead was dry. His pulse was normal. The only thing wrong with him, as far as she could tell, was what he believed. "There is no school board," she said. He frowned like she'd told him the sky wasn't real. "They're right there," he whispered. Later, Margaret would tell police she was sure at that moment that he was having a stroke. She would say she'd never seen fear in his eyes like that before. Not fear of her. Not fear of being wrong. Fear of being the only one who could see something. By the time they reached St. Boniface, he was quiet again. Too quiet. He walked into the admitting area under his own power. He answered the intake nurse's questions. He joked once badly about grading papers from a hospital bed. He seemed, in their words, oriented, appropriate, and mildly anxious. There is no mention in the intake notes of people in the doorway. There is no mention of a school board. There is no mention of a girl. The story changes before the first form is even signed. St. Boniface was not a bad hospital. Not in the way we usually mean that. It wasn't overcrowded. It wasn't collapsing. It wasn't the kind of institution you picture when you hear the phrase mental ward. It was a small, regional medical center with a psychiatric wing that could handle short-term crises, but not long-term cases. The kind of place that stabilizes you, labels you, and moves you on. In the weeks that followed, the staff would insist they did everything by the book. They ran a CT. They checked his labs. They monitored his vitals. All normal. They called in a psychiatrist for a consult. That's where the second version of the story begins. According to the psychiatric evaluation, Oliver reported insomnia, visual disturbances, voices he described as familiar but out of place, a sense that time is folding in on itself. Those are words from the file. Time is folding in on itself. If you work in mental health, you've probably heard stranger things. The human mind has hundreds of ways to break itself. But what made Oliver's case stand out wasn't his phrasing. It was the consistency. Every time someone asked him what was wrong, he said a version of the same thing. I keep seeing scenes that already happened. Not hallucinations in the traditional sense. Not demons. Not spiders crawling out of the light fixtures. But repeats. Conversations he'd already had. Lessons he'd already taught. Arguments with his wife that hadn't happened yet the way he remembered them. Memories that didn't line up with the day he was living. When the psychiatrist asked him to clarify, he gave an example. I woke up this morning, he said, and I knew my car was gone. He smiled a little when he said it, the half-awkward smile of someone trying to make an absurd thing sound reasonable. But when I looked out the window, it was still there in the driveway. Same frost on the windshield. Same dent in the fender. I thought, okay, I'm just tired. I'm mixing up days. So he paused. But when I came back from work, the driveway was empty. The nurse's notes marked that as coincidence interpreted as delusion. The psychiatrist wrote something different. He wrote, patient displays early-stage reality testing impairment. No evidence of substance abuse. Reports high levels of stress at work. Recommend observation and initiation of antipsychotic medication. Medication which was never started. Not that day. Not the next. The pharmacy's signature line is blank for 3 days in a row. Someone wrote the prescription. No one filled it. At this point in the story, everyone around Oliver agrees on a few key facts. He was overworked. He was not sleeping. He was distressed. He was saying things that did not make sense. What they disagree on is how quickly it escalated. According to the nursing staff, Oliver remained calm, cooperative, engaged with care for the first 48 hours. There are notes about him watching television in the common room, talking quietly to another patient about football, and asking politely if someone could call his wife and let her know he was okay. According to Margaret, when she visited that second night, he grabbed her wrist so hard it left bruises and whispered, "Don't let them put me in the wrong room." She asked what he meant. "They're mixing us up," he said. "The charts, the names, the beds. I keep waking up in rooms I've never seen, and they keep telling me I've been in them for days." She called for the nurse. By the time the nurse arrived, his grip had loosened. He smiled again, that same bad joke smile. "Sorry," he said. "I must be more tired than I thought." The nurse wrote, "Patient's wife, anxious, projecting. Patient appropriate, reassuring, recommended family psychoeducation." No one documented the bruises on her wrist. No one documented the wrong rooms. No one documented the fact that when Margaret left that night, she turned back at the door and saw her husband sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the ceiling, lips moving as if counting something she couldn't see. If you're still here listening, ask yourself something and tell me in the comments. If someone you love told you the hospital was mixing them up, moving them, changing their records, altering their environment, would you assume they were paranoid? Or would you wonder, even for a second, whether the system built to take care of them was more fragile than it looked? Because what happened next is where the lines begin to blur. Not in his mind, in the file. On day 3, the chart begins to fracture. In the official timeline, Oliver slept a total of 5 hours that night, in 2 short blocks. His pulse remained steady. No signs of agitation were recorded. The nursing notes read, 3:15 inpatient. Observed sleeping in room 412. 3:30 a.m. Breathing regular, no distress. 3:45 a.m. Patient still in bed, no issues. Those lines reappear in multiple internal audits. Copy and pasted, identical, but there's a problem. Room 412 was empty that night. The bed check log for that wing, written by a different staff member, shows a handwritten note in the 310-350 column, 412 discharged. The discharge slip for the patient previously assigned to 412 is time-stamped 9:22 p.m. No one was assigned to that room when those 3:15, 3:30, and 3:45 observations were made. Yet someone recorded that Oliver was sleeping there, breathing regularly, exhibiting no distress. In reality, by that time, he had already been moved to a different floor. He'd been transferred at 11:06 p.m. to room 518. A detail confirmed by the bed transfer order, the elevator camera, and the signature of the orderly who walked him up. There are 3 versions of where he was that night. The transfer order says 518. The bed log says 518. The nursing notes insist 412. None of them mention where his mind was. In interviews conducted years later, long after the case was closed, former staff members remembered something else about that night. The power flickered. Not a full outage. Not enough to trigger the backup system. Just a stutter. Lights dimming and brightening, monitors recalibrating, clocks pausing for less than a second before continuing. Enough for most people to shrug it off. But in Oliver's mind, it was proof. In his own words, spoken to a resident physician at 4:02 a.m., he said, "The night repeated." He described lying in bed and watching the same nurse walk past his door 3 times in a row, each time at 3:27 a.m., holding the same chart, adjusting her glasses in the same way, coughing once before turning the corner. "I know what déjà vu is," he said. This wasn't that. The resident wrote, "Patient-insistent on-time loop phenomenon, likely temporal lobe involvement or early psychosis, recommend EEG." The EEG order was entered. No EEG was performed. The machine was down for maintenance that week. At least that's what the maintenance log says. There is no work order number. There is no technician signature. There is just a line. "Id unit unavailable. Do not schedule new studies."
9 days later, Oliver was gone. Officially, he never left the hospital. Unofficially, a deputy almost killed him with his cruiser 11 miles outside of town, barefoot, mumbling, "I was never here," with dried IV tape still clinging to his arm. The hospital says he experienced a dissociative fugue, that he walked out after a medication adjustment,
Found an exit, and wandered until the world narrowed to 4 words he could still hold on to. The problem with that explanation is simple. Every exit to the outside from the 5th floor is alarmed. There are no alarm records for that night. No door opens. No door closes. No siren. No notification. Security logs show no activity on the cameras pointed at the stairwells between midnight and 3 a.m. One camera shows a frozen frame of an empty hallway for 3 hours straight. When the tech team reviewed it, they logged the problem as recording error. Like the EEG. Like the bed check. Like the room numbers. Error. The institutional word we use when we don't want to ask what else it could be. So what actually happened? Did a man in the midst of a psychotic break slip through a series of coincidental system failures and walk out into a freezing night? Or did the institutional record begin to warp around his collapse in a way no one wanted to admit, until the easiest solution was to say he'd never really left their care at all? In Part 2, we'll go deeper into those missing hours, the deputy's dash cam, the contradictory statements from the nurses on duty, and Oliver's own attempt to reconstruct the 9 days he lost, using memories everyone around him insisted were impossible. For now, if you're still here in the dark with me, listening to this case, let me know in the comments. Do you trust the record? Or do you think there are moments when the system itself breaks? And if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. Some case files are disturbing because of what people do. This one is disturbing because of what everyone decided not to see. The deputy's report from the night Oliver Grady was found is 3 pages long. The first page is clean, procedural. The second is messy, handwritten corrections. The third is nearly unreadable. That's where the truth begins to fracture. The dash cam that recorded nothing. The deputy who nearly struck Oliver with his cruiser Deputy Lewis was calm when he radioed dispatch. Possible pedestrian in the roadway, male, barefoot, appears confused. What he didn't know at that moment was that his dash cam, which had been functioning perfectly all shift, caught none of it. When internal review pulled the footage later, it showed an empty road, no pedestrian, no figure, no headlights illuminating a body, only the sudden stop of the cruiser and Lewis stepping into an empty frame shouting, "Sir? Sir? Can you hear me?" Medical experts would later say Lewis was suffering from stress-induced misperception, that he saw a shadow, braked, and imagined the rest. Lewis disagreed. He told investigators, "He wasn't a shadow. I touched him. I held his shoulders. He was ice cold." When they reminded him the dash cam showed no one, he stared at the wall for nearly a full minute before whispering, "Then what did I almost hit?" The institution called that a panic response. I call it the first confirmed contradiction. Because the microphone did record one thing, a second voice. Not Lewis. Not the radio operator. A faint whisper in the background 9 minutes into the recording. He was never here. The same phrase Oliver repeated. Word for word. Tone for tone. Lewis never heard it in the moment. He only learned about it when Internal Affairs played back the audio for him. His reaction? He vomited in the trash bin beside the table. The hospital's version and why it fails. St. Boniface Medical Center insisted Oliver never left the building. Their timeline reads as follows. 1 a.m. patient sedated after agitation. 1:20 a.m. asleep. 2 a.m. nurse observation. Stable, resting. 3 a.m. nurse observation. Stable, resting. 3:15 a.m. patient found asleep in room 518. 4 a.m. vital signs normal. At 6 a.m. breakfast served. 7:10 a.m. patient missing from room. 7 hours of stable rest. No escape. No wandering. No event. Except for one problem. At 3:03 a.m., according to police dispatch logs, Deputy Lewis radioed, male located on County Road 17, responsive but confused. 3:03 a.m., 20 minutes before the hospital, claims Oliver was asleep in his bed. Even allowing for human error, clocks that are slightly off or imperfect memory, the timestamps aren't close. They are proof of impossibility. At 3:03 a.m., Oliver Grady cannot simultaneously be on County Road 17, barefoot and hypothermic, and asleep in room 518 on the 5th floor of St. Boniface. Unless one of the entire systems, medical or law enforcement, is lying, or broken, or something else entirely was operating that night. The 3 nurses and their 3 versions. 3 nurses were on duty that night. Nurse Walden, senior nurse. Nurse Wyatt, new in her first year. Nurse Armitage, float nurse, covering for a sick call. When interviewed separately 2 days later, their accounts contradicted each other in ways no investigation could reconcile. Nurse Walden's version. He was quiet all night, slept deeply, no issues. He didn't get out of bed once. Nurse Wyatt's version. He was restless, kept asking what time it was, said the rooms were wrong. I checked on him twice between midnight and 3. Nurse Armitage's version. I never saw him. I was told he'd been transferred off the floor earlier that evening. So according to the staff, he never moved. He was restless and talking. He was not on the floor at all. 3 versions, 3 realities, 3 fragments of a story that cannot fit together no matter how they are arranged. The hospital called this poor communication. But the timestamps on their badge swipes suggest something deeper. All 3 nurses swiped into room 518 between 2:55 and 3:10 a.m. Meaning, all 3 believe they checked on him at the same time. In a room one of them claims he wasn't assigned to, while he was reportedly in 2 places at once. The bed sensor that activated after he was found. Room 518 had a weight sensor under the mattress standard for patients on watch. The report claims the sensor never triggered during the night. But the raw data shows something else. At 3:17 a.m., 14 minutes after he was found on the road, the mattress registered a sudden weight increase, as if someone sat down on the bed. Then at 3:18, the weight vanished abruptly. The hospital claimed this was a glitch. The manufacturer disagreed. The manufacturer said, a sensor does not glitch in a way that mimics a person sitting down unless an external force acts on it. In plain English, someone sat on that bed after Oliver was already found outside. Not Oliver. Not staff, no badge swipes recorded. Not recorded in the observation notes. Someone or something. Sat on that bed for 60 seconds, then disappeared. Oliver's condition after recovery. When Oliver was transferred back to St. Boniface after his discovery on the road, his vital signs were not what you expect from a man barefoot in freezing temperatures. His core temperature was normal. Not elevated. Not lowered. Not even borderline. The ER doctor wrote, physiologically inconsistent with environmental exposure. Inconsistent means impossible. You do not stand barefoot in 20 degrees Fahrenheit weather for an hour and have a normal core temperature. You do not walk 11 miles overnight without shoes and present with perfect circulation. You do not have dry, warm skin after standing on black ice for more than 30 minutes. Unless he wasn't standing there for an hour. Unless he wasn't walking for 11 miles. Unless something else happened, something that bypassed the physical reality entirely. When questioned, Oliver simply said, "I didn't walk, I arrived." Then he followed it with, "I keep remembering something, but I don't know if it happened or if I dreamed it while they were rearranging the rooms." The beginning of his memory reconstruction, Oliver was asked to recount the 9 missing days. What he described did not match any known pattern of psychosis, fugue state, dissociation, PTSD, delirium, or substance-related hallucination. He described structured sequences, repeating events, days looping, conversations shifting, a hospital room that changed size, faces replacing faces, nurses repeating the same sentence 3 times in a row, and always the same phrase creeping into the edges of memory. "You were never here." When asked who said it, he answered, "All of them." When asked which them, he said, "The ones who looked like staff, and the ones behind them, the ones who were learning how to look human." The psychiatrist dismissed this as symptomatic delusion. But there was one detail no one could explain. Oliver provided the layout of a hospital room that does not exist. A room with a double door, a slanted ceiling, a vent on the floor, not the wall, a metal chair bolted to the ground. No architectural record of such a room exists at St. Boniface. But the old blueprints of the previous building, demolished in 1987, show an isolation chamber matching his description exactly. A room he could not have seen. A room that hasn't existed for 36 years. Unless part of the hospital is still there. Not physically, but structurally. In the fractures. In the echoes. In the collapse of a mind that may have overheard something the institution did not want anyone to hear. ChatGPT said, "Understood. I'll remove all titles, headers, and section labels. No chapter name. No headings. No breaks that look like titles. Here is part 3 again, rewritten as one continuous DNW forensic narration. Cold, clinical, investigative with 0 titles." They kept Oliver Grady for 6 more days after he was found, though no one could explain what they were hoping to stabilize. His vitals were normal. His scans were normal. His blood work was normal. What deteriorated wasn't his body. It was everything else. The quietness was the first warning. He stopped asking questions. He stopped acknowledging time. He stopped responding to his wife in ways that made sense to her. When she asked what he remembered from the 9 days he'd been missing, he didn't describe hallucinations or disorientation. He described structure, repetition, events occurring in the wrong sequence, as if whole days had been copied and pasted into each other. He said he lived the same Tuesday 3 times. Then half of a Monday that didn't match the Monday he remembered. Then a version of Wednesday where the walls were different and the air vents were on the floor instead of the ceiling. When asked how he knew the vents were wrong, he said he remembered cold air blowing across his ankles. St. Boniface doesn't have floor vents. On the 4th day of observation, he participated in an interview that would later be redacted, misplaced, and eventually marked clinically unhelpful. The audio that survives begins with the psychiatrist asking if he understands why he's there. He answers calmly, almost apologetically, "You think I broke? I didn't. Something else did. When she asked what broke, he says, "The days. Not time. Not memory. Days." He explains that events were rearranged, that he kept waking up inside moments he had already lived, that the staff repeated words and movements down to the exact pitch and pacing. He describes one nurse passing his door at 3:27 a.m., adjusting her glasses, coughing once, turning the corner, then doing it again, and again, same sequence, same timing. When he realized the repetition was too exact to be human error, he said he stopped reacting. He didn't want them to know he noticed. The psychiatrist asked who they were. He answered, "People who looked like staff but didn't know how to stand right. They were practicing." That sentence is where the transcript becomes unreadable. Entire swaths of text are blacked out, except for one final line near the end spoken by Oliver, quiet and certain. "I wasn't missing for 9 days. I was overwritten." 2 days later, he died. The official cause of death was listed as cardiac arrhythmia secondary to acute psychosis. But the autopsy contradicts that. His heart showed no stress. His arteries were clear. His brain had no swelling, no lesions, no oxygen deprivation. He did not die of fear, or exhaustion, or exposure. Physically, there was nothing wrong with him. But the autopsy did reveal something the hospital couldn't explain. His stomach contents contained traces of a meal from the hospital's psychiatric menu. Nothing unusual except that particular menu item hadn't been served for almost a year. The dietary program had been updated 11 months earlier. No food from the previous year existed in the building. And yet, it was inside him. When this inconsistency was raised, the hospital claimed a labeling error. The pathologist who signed the report disagreed. The meal was real. It had been digested. And the timestamp of its last appearance in the hospital system does not appear anywhere within the period Oliver was admitted. It appears on a date that no longer exists in the hospital's operational record. A date that may have been one of his repeated days. A date the institution itself erased. 3 months later, an anonymous envelope appeared in the sheriff's drop box. Inside was a USB drive containing a single video file. Grainy security footage. A camera angle that matched no known installation in St. Boniface. The room naming label matched Oliver's last room number. The footage is timestamped 3 minutes after his official time of death. The room is occupied. Not by him. Not by staff. A tall figure stands by the bed, posture subtly wrong, as if balancing weight the way a human would, is something it learned recently, but imperfectly. The ceiling vent in the video is positioned on the wrong wall. The bed frame is from an older design, retired decades earlier. The doorway is the wrong width. The room is accurate to no existing architecture in the building. The camera was never logged. The camera angle does not correspond to any installation. The file metadata shows no origin. The hospital called it fabricated. They renovated the entire wing 3 months later. New walls, new flooring, new vents. Room numbers reassigned. Oliver's wife asked why. No one answered. Staff who worked during his final week later admitted privately that parts of the floor didn't feel the same from one day to the next. One said she walked into what should have been a storage closet and found a furnished patient room, only to return an hour later and find the closet back in place. She requested a transfer soon after. Her logbook for that date is missing 6 hours of documentation. The night nurse who spoke to Oliver moments before he died said he was calm, curious even. She asked if he needed anything before she dimmed the lights. He smiled gently and said, "It's all right. I know I was never here." 16 minutes later, he was gone. There was no code blue, no struggle, no monitor alarm. His heart rate simply flattened as if stopped by a command rather than a condition. So what happened to Oliver Grady? A catastrophic psychological break could explain the delusions. Institutional neglect could explain the contradictions. Poor documentation could explain the timeline failures. But nothing explains the physical impossibilities. Nothing explains the meal from a discontinued menu. Nothing explains the sensor activating after he was already found outside. Nothing explains the 3 nurses who each saw him in different places at the same time. Nothing explains a camera recording a room that no longer exists. And nothing explains how a man can walk 11 miles barefoot in sub-freezing temperatures and maintain perfect circulation, unless the system failed in a way it wasn't designed to acknowledge. Unless a person can be physically present in a building while the institution itself decides he was never there. If you're still here listening, tell me in the comments. Do you think Oliver's mind fractured? Or do you think the institution fractured around him? Cases like this don't trend. They don't spread. They disappear quietly, one form at a time. If you want more investigations like this one, consider subscribing to the channel. The next case begins where this one ends, in the space between what a person remembers and what a system insists never happened.